Christy Gusterson with the Community Foundation. Thank you so much for taking your time out this afternoon for this important sharing of data. First, I'd like to just acknowledge and thank some people that are here. So for our any city employees and elected officials that are here, could you guys raise your hand or stand and be acknowledged? And we thank you for being here. Thank you. Also, any members of the board of directors of the Community Foundation that are here, thank you very much for being here. A special thanks, and you'll find out why in a minute, to Sportran and Alan Bright, who is here. Where's Alan? Thank you, Sportran. And of course, a huge thank you to the Shreveport Regional Arts Council for this lovely space. This is great, so thank you so much. So briefly, the Community Foundation, as many of you know, was founded in 1961, and it serves as a permanent and growing resource for this community. We're currently managing about $135 million in assets, and we owe this all to the generosity of our donors, of which many of you are, so thank you so much for all your involvement over the years. Since 2008, we've actually been publishing this Community Counts, which is an annual report card on the Shreveport-Bossier Metropolitan Statistical Area. We use this data in all that we do, particularly in our competitive grant process. We use it to help us set priorities, track progress, and allocate our resources. And so by publishing this, what we'd like to do is invite all of you in the community, government, nonprofits, for-profits alike, to use the data to help us drive change in Shreveport-Bossier and make it the best it can be. This data that we'll be reporting on shows important trends, and you'll see while we're making a lot of progress in some areas, we have a long way to go in others. And we really ask that you listen and work with us and work together as a community to make some changes. Obviously, at the Community Foundation, we're all about change, but we can't do it alone. It's going to take public-private partnerships for us to really reverse some of these negative trends. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our distinguished data presenter, Dr. Dave Norris, and I'm going to ask that we're going to hold all the questions to the end of the presentation. So let me give you a little bit of his background. He's the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Louisiana Tech University. He oversees the university's research enterprise campus, and directs the university's network of business and entrepreneurial development services. He has served on several statewide boards, including the Louisiana Business Incubator Association, the LONI Economic Development Advisory Board, Louisiana Occupational Forecasting Conference, and he's currently the president of the board of the Greater Ouachita Coalition for AIDS Resources and Education, and serves on the board of the Living Well Foundation in West Monroe. He was the independent economist for the state of Louisiana from 2002 to 2005, charged with evaluating the state's economic development programs and incentives. Previously, he was on the economics faculty at Northeastern University in Boston and served in the office of the chief economist at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 1998 to 2000. He received his undergraduate degree from Louisiana Tech and a master's and a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin. And most importantly, he and his wife Amanda are the parents of two 21-month-old twins, boy and girl, and that's clearly his most proud role. So anyway, without further ado, Dr. Norris.
Thank you, Christy. A lot of what she said in that introduction is true, and I'll let you go on the internet and find out which part of it is true. The part about the twins is true. It's also true that, yes, I am too old to have 21-month-old twins, but I have them, and as somebody said earlier, I'm not giving them away. I wish I could bring them with me everywhere I go, but if I had them right now, they'd be distracting and you couldn't hear what I'm saying, so I want you to hear what I have to say. I am an economist here. It's true that I have a position at Louisiana Tech, but in my role on this project, I'm acting as an economist. I'm looking at all of this with the eyes and the mindset of an economist to be objective with data and try to tell a story about data that's informative and that a community can act on. I want to thank Christy. I want to thank all the folks at the foundation, Paula Hickman, our predecessor. You know, just the fact that Shreveport has this foundation is a sign of community strength. The fact that you have this foundation and you've had it for this long is an opportunity to promote change and to lead change and set a vision for change in your community, for positive change. And this foundation has been doing that. This foundation is going to keep doing that, I hope, in the future. But it's a wonderful asset to your community, and you're to be commended for creating it, supporting it, and sustaining it all of these years. It's been our honor. My wife Amanda and I have done this project, this report, for the last 4 years. I guess this is our 4th year doing this. We do it because we think it's a meaningful project, and we love working with the Community Foundation. We think it's important. As an economist, I can tell you that the communities that don't collect data on themselves, honest, objective data, detailed, expansive, boring data, they make uninformed decisions. Sometimes it all works out, but it's just luck. But the smart communities, like Shreveport, are collecting this kind of information, they're organizing it, and they're trying to act on it. They're trying to interpret it, and they're trying to act on it. And so it's an honor for Amanda and I to be a part of that. So what I'm going to do today is really a high-level overview. There's a lot of data in this report, a lot of tables, a lot of narrative about that data. But the biggest role I play, my wife is the brains behind all this. She's the data hound and knows where to find data and knows how to interpret it and knows how to present it. And what I try to do is tell a story about it that's informative, that communities can act on. So, and most of you can't look at any one piece of data, any one table in this report and determine what you need to go do. You have to put pieces together like pieces of a puzzle, and you have to kind of understand how they relate to each other to draw out insights that you can act on. So that's really what I'm going to share with you today, is a few key insights. I'm happy to talk and answer questions about any other details or little bits and pieces about the report, how we do it, or any other thing that we didn't talk about today. But right now, it's just a high-level overview of some key insights that really come together from pulling a few pieces of data together from the report that tell a story. But this is kind of the overview of how it's organized. I think there are 54 different indicators in the report, 150 tables or something like that, in the way that they're organized and presented. But you can break this data up into data on population, on economic well-being, human capital, health, physical environment, and social environment. And you could move some of these indicators into different categories. We categorize them this way because it makes some sense. It's got some logic to it, and it helps us tell stories about the data. And these are relatable categories that make sense to people. But those are the main categories of data in the report. And it's really those 5, from economic well-being down to physical environment, that really tell us a lot about what's happening in our community and what we can act on. So if you combine all of the stuff in this report, all the data, all the categories, and you look at one overall ranking, we do a lot of ranking of the peer communities. There are 10 other peer communities in this report, along with the Shreveport-Bossier Metropolitan Statistical Area. And that is the area that we look at. Caddo, Bossier, DeSoto, Webster Parish is the primary focus of the report compared to these peer communities. So if you just aggregate all that, and that's sort of informative, there's some problems with doing that, but if you just aggregate all that and aggregate all those rankings, we come in about 7th out of 11 in the peer community group in this report. The years that we've been doing it, we fluctuate from 7th to 8th in our overall ranking. That's combining economics and health and social environment and all of those other categories. So the big overarching story is we come in the low-middle range of the peer communities that we're looking at. Some of these are really direct peers. Some of them are a little bit aspirational peers. But we rank right kind of in the low-middle range. But the good news is we're moving up. We've moved up from where we were last year, 8th among those 11. really wish I could just walk out there with you guys. Look at that. I'm getting closer. The more I knew, I'm getting closer. Look at that. I'll be sitting in somebody's lap in a minute. Probably yours. Looks comfortable. So here's a few observations. There's data in the report on per capita income and per capita output. And for an economist, income and output are the same thing. If you make a bunch of stuff and you sell it, you get income back for that, right? So you can look at the output for a community as a whole or the income that comes back from that. Well, Shreveport-Bossier, the MSA, in fact, relative to its peer communities, is quite a productive economy. So a lot of output, a lot of income generated from that output. We were ranked third the last few years among our peer communities, fifth this year. But it's a strong showing. If you go and look at other data in the report that shows household income, we rank very poorly on household income, median household income. So what that, and there's some other data that you could look at to indicate in terms of poverty or average wage rates, all things that we rank relatively low on. But we rank high on the overall income that's coming into this economy. So what that tells me as an economist, objectively, is that there's a lot of income being generated in this economy. It's not very evenly distributed or even proportionally distributed. We have a productive workforce that's working, but the returns to labor for that workforce are relatively low compared to our peer communities. So we have you could call it an income inequality problem. You could call it a low returns to labor problem. There's a lot that could be said about that, but that's something that's come up in this report every year that we've been involved in it. And I think it's something that ought to be a topic of conversation in the community. How do you try to ensure that work in the Shreveport-Bossier MSA has a living wage return to it, right? That it's the kind of jobs and the kind of work opportunities that are generating a good living for people. So if there's one piece, one insight in this report that you take away and you don't remember anything else, it would be the story about children living in poverty in Shreveport-Bossier MSA. And if there's one thing that you were going to act on, it would be this. There's nothing that affects the long-term prospects of a community more than what's happening to their children 18 and under, but even more so 5 years and under. And this is where we have a big problem, a big challenge. More than a third of the families with children, that means minor children, 18 and under, or under 18, living in poverty. That's actually what that number is over there. What does that say, 35.7? That's the percentage of families with children, with minor children living in poverty in Shreveport-Bossier. That's obviously way out of whack to our peers, but it's too big a number. If you drop one of those parents off and talk about single parents with minor children, the number goes up even higher. And if you drop one of those parents off and just talk about single parents with children under 5, it goes even higher. So that is a deep-seated and complicated problem, but it's one that if you ignore it and you don't come up with some meaningful solutions, some meaningful targeted efforts to change that over time, and it's a long-term problem, right? That problem doesn't change next year. It's really hard for elected officials to get any credit for anything they do, and they got to stay in office for 20 years to get any credit for it, right?
Right.
But you have to be able to make those kinds of investments as a community because this number has to change if you want to achieve the things that you want to achieve for a community as a whole. That doesn't just affect children in poverty. It affects them more than anybody else, but it affects everybody. It costs everybody money. It costs everybody opportunity. So that's the biggest takeaway to me. On the flip side, there's there aren't very many things in the field of economics that are sort of uniformly accepted or universally accepted and agreed upon. But this one is. The dollar you invest in a 4-year-old has some of the best economic return over the life of that child of any dollar that you can invest in anything. So that is that information combined with this data, it sends a strong message to the community about putting emphasis here, and I know the foundation wants to do that. Here's some positive information. This is one of the ways to address that problem. We see more of our 3- and 4-year-olds being enrolled in school. Just in the last year, that number jumping up significantly. I don't know exactly what was driving that up, but that is a big change in 1 year. And let's do that 3 or 4 more years in a row, and we'll be where we need to be. The number's still too low. So that says 49.7% of our 3- and 4-year-olds are enrolled in school. That means that 50.3% of them are not. Some of those are at home with a well-educated parent, getting a wonderful experience and being socialized and all that, but most of them are not. And that's a number that has to keep going up. I saw some more progress in some of our education indicators. The percentage of people with post-secondary degrees, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees. Graduation rate has increased quite strong over the last 10 years. We've seen a greater percentage of 16 and 19-year-olds enrolled in school. The number of 16 to 19-year-olds not enrolled in school and not in the labor force, and we can all imagine where they are if they're not in school and not in the labor force, is a big indicator. And that's been a problematic number in this report for a lot of years. We've seen that number improve significantly over the last year. And so all of these are strong indicators of where maybe our education numbers, our human capital numbers are going. And you can think of a lot of different reasons why these numbers might be going in the right direction. And we need to continue making investments in those spaces and focusing on how to continue to grow the number of people with these post-secondary degrees and the number of youth that are engaged in school and in the labor force. So another story that you can sort of put together with piecing together data from different parts of the report. So we got 31.7 of the people working full-time or part-time in the Shreveport-Bossier MSA live in poverty. So it's a common anecdotal observation that, you know, if we can find jobs for people that are living in poverty, we can bring them out of poverty. And all of the things being equal, that can work if those are jobs that provide a living wage and can support a family. But we have, and there's a lot of anecdotal information out there, although not a lot of objective data to support it. Doesn't mean it's not true, but there's a lot of anecdotal information out there about lots of trade jobs that pay really good wages, but we can't fill them because we don't have the skilled workforce. I think there's probably some pockets where that's true. One thing that we know is true, and we have objective data on it, is that there's a lot of jobs out there that people are working, trying to support a family, but they're living in poverty. So, and we also have a lot of data that shows those jobs, those non-living wage jobs, are growing at a fast rate. The demand for moving people into those jobs is high. And so that's a force that we have to find a way to fight against. We can't be growing the number of jobs that do not support a family. Now, it's also true that the majority of adults living in poverty lack a college education or any kind of post-high school education. So that's another part of the story, and we see, you know, those numbers improving, as we mentioned in the previous slide. Another way to look at this, if you look at the figure on your right over there, the blue bar shows the percentage of people of working age who have no post-secondary degree. Now, there are a lot of people who don't have a post-secondary degree who go on and have some strong careers in trades, but also in some professional spaces. They become entrepreneurs. There's a lot of good success stories out there. That is not the norm for people without post-secondary degrees. That's the exception. And so as a community, we need to be thinking about how do we reduce that number of 70% of our working age population that has no post-secondary degree. You can't be a competitive community in a 21st century economy, at least not a high wage economy, if you got 70% of your population that does not have a post-secondary degree. But like we saw in the previous slide, making progress there, so we got to keep that progress up. So the Affordable Care Act, what was that, 2010? It seems like a lifetime ago. That was passed, and then it wasn't really fully implemented. That act wasn't fully implemented until I believe like 2014. But from the time that was fully implemented to the time this data is 2016 data, the number of uninsured people in the Shreveport-Bossier area fell by half. So it was 22%, 22.1 or 2 or 3, something like that, fell to 10.2, more than half. I mean, that is a dramatic decrease in the number of uninsured people, dramatic increase in the number of insured people. That has a tremendous impact, not just on health, but on economic activity in the community. So any community like Shreveport-Bossier that has seen that kind of improvement in health coverage should be wondering what's going to happen after the Affordable Care Act is finally dismantled, because we can't have those numbers going back to 22% in our community. So we've got to have some way that we're either going to maintain or sustain that progress in reducing the number of uninsured. And it's important to note that we have 12% of our employed adults who also don't have health insurance. And that's related to a lot of these, the number earlier, 31.7% of people working full-time or part-time living in poverty. A lot of those kinds of jobs that leave those people still living in poverty when they're working full or part-time also leave them without health coverage. All the communities on that list have seen similar drops in the number of uninsured people in their community since 2014. So jumping to the health category, we look at health habits, health behaviors, food environment, and health outcomes. And you wouldn't be surprised that a community that's got some bad numbers, the number of people living in poverty and education levels and things like that, to also have some poor health outcomes. And the mortality rate is the one that's most related to those other indicators that we've seen. But what's most concerning here, and should get the most attention, is again looking at youth and our kids, this high rate of low weight births and this high teen birth rate. We have the highest among our peers, and it's a high number. It's not just compared to our peers, it's a high number. And that, you don't have to list the number of problems that low birth weight baby is going to have to deal with, and his parents, and that teen mother is going to have to deal with, and that our community around them are going to have to deal with. So addressing that low birth weight and high teen birth rate numbers should be a strong focus for the community. The crime numbers are fun and popular for people to talk about, and we throw those around a lot. In my view, these crime numbers in this report are almost entirely driven by all the other data that we see. These crime numbers don't drive the other numbers drive the crime numbers. So if you were really going to try to move these numbers, it's putting your investment in those other areas and trying to have those impacts is what moves these numbers. But we have seen the violent crime and the property crime rates in Shreveport-Bossier fall dramatically since 2005. Did see those numbers tick up the last couple of years, but not anywhere close to what it was back in 2005. So there's been positive developments in the violent and property crime rates in our region. And that's me. I asked them to put a picture of my twins in this report just to kind of cheer everybody up, but we'll get that next year. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be a part of this report and to be a part of this. Thank you.
Video to highlight some of the great partners that we have in this community that are helping out with some of these statistics.
Hi everyone, it's Emily Smith with the Community Foundation. There's no doubt that there's a lot of work to be done to address the critical issues in Shreveport-Bossier. But today, we're going to be highlighting some of the organizations working in the historic Ledbetter Heights and Allendale neighborhoods. Let's go for a ride. Shreveport's Ledbetter Heights neighborhood is one of the earliest parts of the city to be settled outside of downtown and is perhaps best known for its rich music history. It's now part of the Shreveport Choice Neighborhoods planning area and is home to several effective programs. Philadelphia Center's Mercy Center is the only HIV/AIDS specific 24-hour residential housing program in Northwest Louisiana. These houses were originally built in the late 1800s and are now home to 19 men and women. Down the street from Mercy Center is Providence House, which has been serving homeless families and children for 30 years through services such as their 4-star Child Development Center, parenting classes, and workforce development programs. They are utilizing education as the central tool to end the cycle of homelessness permanently. Next door, one entity has their eyes locked on the future. Shreveport Common is aiming to revitalize a 9-block area at the west edge of downtown Shreveport through creative placemaking. The plan includes public green spaces, mixed residencies, revitalization of current structures, and space for creative business entities. West of Ledbetter Heights is Allendale, which is alive with schools, parks, and businesses. Although Allendale is no stranger to hardship, there are many people and organizations who are committed to strengthening this community, and many of those efforts begin in the schools. One organization aiming to change alarming trends in education is Step Forward. The group is focused on cradle to career, which means providing children with the support and opportunities necessary to result in a sustainable living wage job by the age of 25. From kindergarten readiness and 3rd grade literacy to increasing graduation rates, the organization has already seen quite a bit of success, including improving ACT scores, 3rd grade literacy, and decreasing the number of dropouts. Volunteers of America provides services to one of the area's most vulnerable populations, children in poverty. Through full-service case management, their program, Communities in Schools, is addressing behavioral, academic, and attendance issues in Caddo Parish Transformation Zone schools. They place highly qualified site coordinators directly into schools where they connect students and families to critical resources based on their specific needs. By providing students with one-on-one relationships with trained, caring adults, they're currently helping more than 2,000 students succeed in school and life. As a community, we still have a long way to go, but armed with the knowledge of current issues and a vision of where we'd like to be, we know that with caring individuals like you, we can reach our goal of a stronger, more vibrant North Louisiana for everyone. For now, this is our stop. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you for being with us today. I'm Liz LABORDE, the Director of Community Investment at the Community Foundation. Can you guys hear me? Am I too loud? No? Okay. As Christy mentioned in her opening, data drives everything we do at the Community Foundation, especially our grant making. You saw some examples of some of the programs that we fund, but I want to talk to you at sort of a higher level about the types of programs that research has shown to be effective and tell you about how we invested our dollars last year. The data in this report guides our grant making in 3 key areas. That's education, workforce development, and health. And as Davey explained, these are very interconnected issues because poverty is going to affect your ultimate educational attainment. The aggregate educational attainment of a community impacts whether there's a skilled workforce there, and that's going to impact whether business will come and provide jobs in your community. If you don't have access to employment and healthcare, that's going to affect your overall health outcomes. And so it's a feedback loop. And when we look at our grant making, we are looking at this cycle and trying to find effective leverage points. So in the area of education, research has shown there are some programs that will make a big difference. Cradle to career initiatives that are carefully implemented, that's like our wonderful Step Forward initiative. Early childhood education programs, universal pre-K, exposing children to rich language early in their life. We've all heard about the word gap. These are the kinds of initiatives that the Community Foundation invests in. We're really focused on 3rd grade reading because that's when you stop learning to read and you read to learn. And you have to be able to do that to continue on successfully in your educational career. Last year, 2017, the Community Foundation invested $2.1 million in programs that were aligned with this research. Another area that we're focused on is workforce development. And we feel that creating a bridge between employers and higher educational institutions is essential so that we can create training programs for individuals for demand sectors in our community. Not what's the hottest job in the United States of America, but what is going to provide a living wage job in our MSA. And so we are focused on funding initiatives that bridge those 2 communities. We also are focused on supports for first-time college students to help them not only get into college, but to graduate and then move successfully into employment. Last year, the Community Foundation invested $1.9 million in these types of programs. And then finally, improving health outcomes. The Affordable Care Act has made a significant positive impact in our community, but there are still people who are in the netherworld and do not have access to health care or who are on waiting lists to be approved for health care. And so research shows us if we can provide a health home, if we can provide people with the tools they need to manage chronic health conditions, that can significantly impact their life and their ability to be productive citizens and participate in the workforce. So last year, the Community Foundation invested $750,000 in these types of programs. We wish we had all the money in the world, but we don't. And so we have to invest our dollars as strategically as possible, as effectively as possible. And as Christy said in our opening, it's going to take a public-private partnership to really change the tide in our community. And so we are so grateful that you care enough to be here and hear this data, that you want to be an informed citizen, and we just invite you to work with us as we make positive change. At this point, I think we'd like to open the floor up for questions. Oh, no, wait. Christy has an exciting announcement. Okay, big reveal. This is going to be great.
So, we do our regular competitive grant process every year, and we're making a little change this year. So we're going to do our regular competitive grant process, but pouring over, and I should say that the background report for the small report you have is like 200 pages long, is that right? So pouring over those 150 to 200 pages of data over the last few months has really had an impact on us as a foundation. And just this week, we decided to dedicate up to $1.25 million over the course of the next 5 years to a special initiative aimed at ensuring the success of school children that are in poverty. And again, alone, that money's not going to be enough. So we hope we have lots of partners in the community that can help us address this issue. Over the course of the next year, we're going to be working to help inform the community as much as we can about issues like the issues that were presented here. And the next informational output that we have is a film that we're going to show on November 1st at the Robinson Film Center at 5:30, and it's about the lasting effects of childhood trauma what can be done to combat the effects of childhood trauma. And also, we'll have a special speaker from Caddo Parish Schools to talk about what Caddo Parish Schools are doing to inform their teachers about trauma. So at this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Norris and Liz back up to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll walk around with the microphone so you can stand and ask questions.
Who's the bravest person first?
Yeah.
Liz, you talked about working with the community to help people get jobs that are in demand in this community. Can you talk about that more? What specifically, what organizations are you working with, and what types of jobs do you see? How do you come to that? And can you just talk about that more, please? Thank you.
Okay, so some of the high demand sectors in our community are healthcare, information technology, construction, did I say IT? So these are areas that our workforce investment boards have identified as high demand sectors in our community. And so at the Community Foundation, we are working with our local colleges and universities, LSUS, Southern, BIPC. We even are broader in this particular initiative, including ULM and Louisiana Tech. And so we provide funds for scholarships for students. If the university will design a program in a high demand sector and then reach out to local businesses, and then we ask the businesses to contribute towards the scholarship funds as well. So we provide some, the business matches. The university selects the student, develops the curriculum, the student goes through that, and then we ask the business to provide an internship and mentoring for the student. And the ultimate goal would be that when the student graduates with a credential, and it could be a credential or an associate's degree or an actual bachelor's degree, that they've already got a relationship with a business and that they will find employment. So that's what the biggest thing that we're doing right now. You're welcome.
Chris?
What do you credit for the increase in the number of 3 and 4-year-olds that have enrolled in school? What has caused that increase, do you think?
I think that there is some federal funding that has been available to our local school system, and while there's not enough currently to have a classroom that would serve every 4-year-old in public school in our community, there are some classrooms, and so I think that's made a difference. We're very interested in seeing that expanded and then finding a stream of permanent long-term funding, because we do believe it's very crucial to the children's success.
One of the things that concerns me is the low wages that we have, and that problem just seems to get worse and worse and worse every year. It seems like that's really a business problem. I mean, in terms of that's who we have to look at, because they're the ones that are paying the wages, or the government if they want to increase the minimum wage so that these people can be earning a living. I don't know if there are any other avenues. I don't see any other avenues in order to increase the wages of ordinary citizens.
Dave may have a better
It's a complex problem. It's not a simple one. At a fundamental level, it means low-wage jobs are growing in your economy. We have low-wage jobs growing across the country, and that's been the case for 30 years in the United States. The low-wage service sector and some other jobs like that have been going for a long time. At the same time that sort of we've seen deunionization and some other things like that that have decreased sort of bargaining power in the market. But the most practical way to address that, in my view as an economist, it's a long-term solution, not a short-term one, is to make investments in a higher skilled workforce so that you are able to attract higher wage jobs over time. There are other things, and my job is not to provide solutions, but there are a lot of other things that communities have done across the country to try to improve the living wage environment in their community for the jobs that they already have at the moment, rather than trying to change the structure of jobs they have in their economy. So those are some more short-term things that you can look at that have happened in other communities. But the long-term strategy is to get more and more people into post-secondary education and higher education and certified and degree for higher paying jobs.
Anybody else?
I'll get one. Are you aware of any other communities that have implemented year-round schools? I think we have one, which would be the Tree Island School. And if you are, are there any statistical results that have come out of that that have shown improvement in terms of results?
My belief is that you do see less loss of learning over summer vacation when children are in year-round schools. But beyond that, Chris, you look like you might have an answer to that. No? Dave?
The data that hi, my name's Carolyn, I have nothing to do with community accounts, but I used to work in education. It's really, hi Robert, it's really, the data's mixed, frankly, on the year-round schools. In some schools it's strong, in some schools it's not. So it's not an easy problem, but one thing,
but one thing that has come out consistently is the lower performing the school, the more it matters that they go longer, either longer day, longer year, or both. So there's a much stronger correlation with lower performing and more at-risk students.
You see what I mean about we can't do it ourselves? I mean, it literally takes the blows, right? So any other questions over here?
I have one. David, you just tell us how you determine peer community?
It's so we look at the federal government has a definition for what an MSA is, so you start with that, and you get however many MSAs there are in the country, I can't remember exactly, and then you take all of those and take the ones that are within 50,000 above or below the population of Shreveport to get similar sized communities. And then we just start working with the rest of it is qualitative, talking to the staff at the Community Foundation, wanted to look at communities in the South generally. But mostly Louisiana and surrounding states, and narrowed it down that way. I think that was probably the last cut, the number of MSAs that were close enough to us in population and geographically close. And we excluded things like big port cities or something like that would kind of skew the data. But we ended up with peer communities that were similar to us in size, but there was plenty of diversity, economic, socioeconomic diversity across those communities, but they all had enough comparability to us that we thought it was relevant to have them as a good peer group.
So are we looking at some of the peer communities to figure out who is doing it right and how we can take from their successes to bring to Shreveport?
I think that's next step. Yeah, I think you're exactly right to look at success stories and try to replicate that. They do tend to be unique. Like each community has its own vibe and its own strengths and weaknesses, but I do think that there are lessons we could learn. Like Dave says, he's not here for solutions, he's just the facts man. It's just the problem. Anybody? Yes?
If instead of embedding Shreveport Bossier in all these other communities, if you started off with 2010, 2011, Shreveport Bossier, what would these trends look like? Do you have any idea?
Oh, if we excluded Webster and DeSoto Parish?
No, if you just had our MSA year after year after year after year, where are we trending? Are we trending up, down, in all these areas? Are we doing better in all of these areas?
I'm gonna let Dave answer this, but my sense is kind of flat.
It's varied. So in the big version of the report, which I hope none of you ever look at, we have a section in each of these big sections. You have something called moving the needle, And it's looking at exactly what you say. It's just looking at our MSA and how these indicators have changed over the last 10 years. Sometimes we go back 12, 14 years. Sometimes we only go back 6 or 8. Depends on what data is available and that kind of thing. But it's varied. There's not a single trend in there. The ones that have changed the most, we did list those here, that graduation rate, that number of people with post-secondary degrees, the health insurance coverage, those have changed the most over that last 5, 10, 12-year time frame. But there's just a lot of variation from one data point to the next, and it all kind of aggregates to very small changes. Does that make sense?
And if you do want that backup data, you can find it at cfnla.org/data. The long report is there as well as the short report.
Or you can just call my wife. She pull it up.
The other numbers I found puzzling, when you look at the people who are employed, who have insurance, and look at the whole population who have insurance, the whole population is better off than the employee. Right? Do you remember? And they have a better percentage.
No, I think the denominator is different there. I don't remember. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but the number of people in the population as a whole that are uninsured is higher than the number of working people that are uninsured.
Oh, uninsured.
Yes, uninsured. Yes, ma'am.
Is it available, or do you all want us to see it if it is available, separating the parishes? So seeing the data for Caddo, Bossier, Webster, and so separately, or do you all want that to stay together?
We don't provide it because, the way that metropolitan statistical areas are measured for the purposes of all kinds of different things, including federal funding and all kinds of, different indicators, pulls together all 4 of the parishes. And we think, I don't, there's just a body of water that separates us, Shreveport from Bossier, and if Bossier does well, Shreveport does well. If Shreveport does well, Bossier does well. So it's really important that we all come together as an MSA, and so we don't report on that data separately.
Now there is in the big report there in the step forward section. There is some breakout of the parish data, but obviously the report is focused on the MSA for exactly the reason that Christy said. Of course, all the data actually is built from parish level data, actually even below that. So again, if you actually wanted to know that, my wife, she knows all that.
I think we have time for just 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah, so you alluded to the complexity of attracting livable wage jobs to areas. And one of the suggestions was to make investments in our youth. Well, Shreveport and the state of Louisiana is having a problem with retaining our younger people that we educate. As a matter of fact, our TOPS program, there was a study that showed that we had a large net export of millions of students that went to Texas. So I know some municipalities are looking at pretty interesting ways of attracting their talent back to those areas like tuition payback programs, etc. So I'm interested to know, have you studied any other, areas that have interesting ways of retaining talent rather than beating it out, primarily to the coastal cities where we see they're having a lot of
I can't say that I know a lot about those, but the example you gave is one, and there are other strategies of that nature, enticements to come back for whatever you think are the challenges that those youths are facing that brought them somewhere else. And that tuition payback thing could be very attractive for your most highly talented people. And on that bigger question, I wish there were simple solutions to a lot of problems. You often heard it, we educate people and then they go off because we don't have the jobs here, so we need the jobs. And so we redirect investment to figure out how to get the jobs here, and then we abandon the other. And speaking again from the economist perspective, the chicken and egg issue, do you get the jobs first or do you educate the workforce first? To me, it's an easy answer to that question. You educate the workforce first. Some of them are gonna leave, and back for a while, a lot of them might leave. But you're never gonna get those highways jobs to come here, hoping one day you'll have the workforce to support it. You gotta have it to get them to come. And so if you're gonna try to make a choice there, you keep investing in your human capital, producing strong, high-skilled people, and then eventually you can use that as the tool that attracts those higher wage jobs.
One more question.
Well, the person to make a statement, since healthcare is a significant component of human being survival, what do you suggest to prevent the dismantling of affordable healthcare?
That's above our pay grade.
The objective data shows that since the Affordable Health Care Act was fully implemented in 2014, it's almost universal across communities, MSAs in the country, that the rates of uninsured adults, primarily focused on adults, has fallen dramatically, and there's been a slowdown in the growth of healthcare costs. Now those are, there are complicated factors that affect all of those things, and there are other aspects of the Affordable Care Act that aren't reflected in those two data points. But those two data points are real. When it's gone, what replaces it? I don't know. But if you see those uninsured rates go back up, that's very expensive for communities like Shreveport, Bossier, and it's economically very difficult to manage.
I think I can speak for a lot of us in here that the crime rates affect the quality of life and economic development and community prosperity, as you say. But if I think most of us as citizens have been seeing that the crime rates are down, and can you elaborate on your statement what you made earlier as far as the crime being higher versus lower?
Well, I think it was over 10 or some year period, the crime rate, violent and property crime rates are down dramatically. But with anything that's going down in this data, it goes like this. It goes up one year, it goes down a little more. So that's been the trend over 10 years, is down dramatically. So it's a very positive trend. But we did make the note that in the last 2 years of data that we have, it's ticked back up. Does that mean it's going to start going up over the long term? I have no idea. Hopefully it's still on a downward trend.
It's important to note here too, and I don't know if any of us said this, that the data in the 2018 report is 2016 data. And I know it says that throughout, but because of the way that data collection works, in order for the data to be reliable and properly vetted, it is 2-year-old data. So it's from 2016.
But this is all of the most recent, credible, publicly available, and some not publicly available data that you can get on any of these kind of indicators.
Most recent, yeah, this is basically the most recent reliable data you can get.
So just to address what Adrian said, so I have 4 children, 3 of them have left. And of course, I would like for all of them to come back, but maybe not right now. We're not ready for that. But I think what we're talking about here today is most important that will bring them back. Just like when you go to a church, and you have to drop your baby off at the nursery, unless they build that great caring place for you to take your children to, you're probably not going to go to that church as you drop your child off. Well, it's schools. You have to build better schools, and we have to support our teachers, and especially on these high skill jobs that we're talking about. I think as far as skill level, the highest skill to me is a good teacher, and build our kids from there. Give them a safe place to go where they can learn to communicate, collaborate, use their critical thinking, creativity. That's my kids come back.
I would say further though, all schools.
Yes, schools. I think it's what it is.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you for caring enough to be here today and listen to 1 hour of data being presented to you. This is really important stuff for Shreveport Bossier, and we so appreciate you being here. If you have any questions and want to review the additional longer report, you can find it on our website. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your